Welcome to Orthodox Christian Television. I'm Father Christodoulos. Next to me is Michael Halford and Vasily Binyaris. To my right is Michael, and to my left is Vasily. We're going to continue our discussion of the book Franks, Romans, Feudalism, and Doctrine, which was written by Father John Romanides. This book influenced the three of us here in a profound way, so much that we're dedicating a third show to it. This is the third installment of the series on the discussion of this book. And not just this book, we're going to also discuss basically what is it that Father John says that has influenced our lives so much, and many other people, and anyone who really looks into his writings with any kind of depth. So I'd like to open up the discussion with kind of a recap of what we've already discussed about Father John's ideas. Basically, he says that the schism in the Orthodox Church, or rather the schism in the Christian world, was not a schism between Greeks in the East and Latins in the West, and that these cultural differences eventually led to a schism in the Church. What Father John says is that there was a schism really between a Frankish nation, or a Frankish religion, if you will, in the West, and an Orthodox Roman church in the East. In the West, the church was also Roman, but it was conquered in increments by the Frankish tribes led by Charlemagne, Charles Martel, and the rest of that family. These Franks conquered the Christian Orthodox Roman Empire in the West, subdued it, subjugated, oppressed it, put it into slavery, eventually used the religion to oppress the people, and that's where you have the diverging religions, the diverging spiritualities. And what Father John has said in other papers is that Orthodoxy is not a religion. Orthodoxy is the cure of religion. And it was the Franks who created a Christian religion. And it's the illness of that religion that Orthodoxy is the cure of. And we discussed in our second show that the main differences between Frankish spirituality, or the Latin Church, and Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Roman Orthodox spirituality, there is a vast difference. And the main difference is that Orthodox Christianity is a spirituality, is a system of therapy that cures and purifies the human heart so that God can come and dwell in that heart and be experienced in that heart, and the human being is cured of the fallen state. Whereas in the Latin Church, there is no such system. So anytime you want to break in?
It's actually interesting. As you're speaking, I was turning the pages to this paper I have here, which is John's book, basically, a photocopy of it. And someone might find it odd listening to us that we would be taking this type of position. Not that we're taking it, but we're basically reiterating what's in the book. If I can just read out of this.
Well, we can say we're taking this position if we want.
Right. I'm just saying, basically, when I was first introduced to the idea that, and also another paper that you pointed out to me, which was basically saying that religion is an illness. It's a sickness, basically, and I find this sentence in this paper here, and it might be shocking to some people. If I can just read out of it.
Sure, read it.
Basically,
absolutely.
The gist of it is what you just said, but just to take it verbatim. Father John Romanides says, "Thus the root cause of all abnormal relations between God and man and among men is that fallen man, i.e. man with a malfunctioning noetic faculty, uses God, his fellow man, and nature for his own understanding of security and happiness. Man outside of glorification imagines the existence of God or gods, which are psychological projections of his need for security and happiness." So that's...
So then, happiness is a social ill.
Right.
Happiness is not, what that's saying there is that happiness is something that man really shouldn't, in his normal condition, shouldn't be seeking after.
Right, and what happens in the process is basically that happiness-seeking person who is essentially ill, sick, according to the spiritual criteria that we use within the Orthodox Church, manipulates other people for the sake of his own happiness or her happiness. And
so in other words, my relationship with you... I'm sorry, Michael.
Also, that person manipulates God and creates religion. Religion becomes an attempt by man to create a means of appeasing this insecurity. And human sacrifice and the pantheon of pagan gods are examples of this kind of attempt to create a system by which man, through his own efforts, can appease the gods, can find the security, can attain to the happiness that the state of being separated from God creates.
In other words, we can get the gods on our side to help us be happy.
Yes.
By sacrifices, by making statues, by doing good instead of doing bad, by doing good deeds,
Yeah.
things like that.
Exactly.
So in other words, these are really idols. This
Yes.
kind of a God is an idol.
Yes, and this is kind of a God, is the God we project. You know, how can we appease these fears, these insecurities within ourselves? And as he says, they become projections, a way of capitulating to our own inner needs.
And what is it that we're mainly afraid of?
Well, he mentioned we're afraid of death, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, the major fear that man faces is death. Almost all motivation for human acquisitiveness, for the gathering of possessions, for the gathering of power, knowledge is a result of what we would call the quest for the avoidance of death, to come to a place where we no longer fear death, where death no longer holds its sway over us.
Immortality of some kind.
Yes.
If it's through the arts, through athletic achievement, scientific achievement, somehow we're going to leave some kind of legacy behind that's going to make us somehow immortal. That's for a totally pagan or even a completely secular viewpoint. But even in certain parts of Christendom, there is an immortality that is being sought after that goes on into the next life.
Yes, and that's basically heaven becomes a projection of our understanding of what happiness is in this life.
So in other words, what makes us happy in this life, our ideas of happiness in this life, sometimes it's comically portrayed as harps and the clouds, and that heaven is somehow going to be that kind of a place, that the kind of situation that made us happy in this life will somehow be transposed to the next life in some maybe altered form of some kind, maybe more spiritual form.
That's
now,
right.
what is it then? If we're not seeking Billy, Vasily, I'm sorry I call you Billy sometimes.
No, that's okay, fine.
Confuse the audience. Vasily, I'll use your Roman name, Vasily.
Thank you.
To use if we're not supposed to be seeking after happiness, what are we supposed to be seeking after? What's first of all, before we get to that,
right.
What's wrong with the audience is probably wondering what's wrong with seeking
right.
after happiness? I mean, what is this monk talking about? Isn't he trying to be happy? I see him smiling once in a while. Isn't that being happy? What are we supposed to be? What's wrong with that?
I think what happens is the fundamental difference between what the belief system we just prefaced this conversation with, as far as happiness seeking and idolatry. And idolatry is not necessarily limited to paganism, because when you have a false belief of even one God, if that one God is based around your own happiness seeking and security, it's a false idea. It's not a real truth. That's also an idol. So we have to just point that out to people. Sometimes they think of idols and they always think of the ancient pagans, the ancient Greeks and Romans who were pagans, and therefore they kind of miss out that there are many people who worship false ideas of also a one God. In line with that, though, the fundamental difference is that we seek not happiness but union with God, our experience with Christ.
So in other words, if we're too busy seeking after happiness, which can be a selfish motivation, it really is.
Yeah.
People will ask, what's wrong with being happy? Well, we shouldn't even qualify it as being wrong or not, or right. It's not bad, it's not good. What it is self-centered.
Exactly.
It's selfish. So in Orthodoxy, we don't have, as Father John explains to us very often, there's really nothing, there's no system of defining things as good or bad or right or wrong. There is, but it's more that something that is good for your health, your spiritual health, or bad for your spiritual health. And that happiness is not, if happiness is not inherently bad or good as a concept on its own, what it is for sure is self-centered and selfish. And what is the problem with that?
Well, the central problem with the quest for personal happiness is that it's all directed towards the self.